Imagine you're the most powerful person on Earth. You command armies that stretch across 3 continents. 60 million people call you their emperor. You live in a palace of unimaginable luxury. You are a god made flesh, and every single day you wake up wondering if your bodyguards are going to kill you. This was the reality for Roman emperors for over 300 years. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite imperial bodyguards, 9,000 of the best soldiers in the empire, hand-picked for their loyalty, their skill, their dedication to protecting the emperor. In 3 centuries of service, they murdered more emperors than they protected. They didn't just kill emperors, they auctioned off the throne to the highest bidder. They installed children as puppet rulers. They terrorized the Senate. They sparked civil wars that killed hundreds of thousands. And for 300 years, no emperor could get rid of them. Because here's the problem. Who do you call when your bodyguards are trying to kill you? Your other bodyguards. This is the story of the most dangerous military unit in history, not because of who they fought, but because of who they were supposed to protect. This is the story of Rome's 300-year protection racket. Let's start at the beginning. The year is 27 BC. The Roman Republic has just torn itself apart in a series of brutal civil wars. Julius Caesar was assassinated. Mark Antony and Cleopatra are dead. The old political order is gone, and standing in the wreckage is one man, Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor. But Augustus had a problem. He'd won the civil war by commanding legions, loyal, battle-hardened legions who had followed him for years. But now the war was over, and Rome, traumatized by decades of conflict, wanted peace. Augustus couldn't keep massive armies near Rome. The Senate wouldn't allow it. The people wouldn't tolerate it. The whole point of becoming emperor was to end the cycle of generals marching on Rome with their armies. But Augustus also couldn't trust anyone. He'd watched Julius Caesar get stabbed to death by his supposed friends. He'd seen how quickly allies could become enemies. He'd spent his entire adult life in a world where betrayal was the norm. So Augustus created something new, the Praetorian Guard, 9 cohorts of elite soldiers, about 4,500 men initially. The name came from the Praetorium, the general's tent in a military camp. They were the emperor's personal guard, his household troops. Here's what made them different from regular legions. First, they were stationed in and around Rome itself. This was unprecedented. Roman tradition held that armed soldiers shouldn't be inside the city limits, but Augustus bent the rules. Some cohorts were in Rome, others in nearby towns. Second, they were paid better, a lot better. A Praetorian made 3 times what a regular legionary made, plus bonuses, plus a guaranteed pension after 16 years of service instead of the 25 years required for regular soldiers. Third, they had direct access to the emperor. They guarded the palace. They accompanied him everywhere. They were the only armed men allowed in his presence. Augustus thought he was being clever. He was creating a loyal, elite force that would protect him from assassination and coup attempts. What he actually created was a monster, but it didn't happen immediately. During Augustus's reign, the Praetorians were professional and disciplined. They did their job. They protected the emperor. The problem started after Augustus died. The year is 14 AD. Tiberius becomes the 2nd emperor of Rome, and he makes a decision that will haunt Rome for 3 centuries. Tiberius appointed a man named Sejanus as the Praetorian prefect, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus was brilliant, ambitious, and absolutely ruthless, and he immediately understood something that would change Roman history forever. The Praetorians were scattered around Rome and nearby towns, divided into separate barracks. This made them less effective as a military force, but more importantly, it made them harder for their commander to control. Sejanus convinced Tiberius to consolidate the entire guard into a single massive fortress on the outskirts of Rome, the Castra Praetoria, a permanent military camp, with walls, towers, and barracks for all 9 cohorts. Tiberius agreed. It seemed reasonable, more efficient, better organization. What Tiberius didn't realize was that he'd just given Sejanus a private army. Sejanus now commanded 9,000 elite soldiers, all living together, all loyal to him, all stationed right outside Rome, and he wasn't about to waste that opportunity. Over the next few years, Sejanus systematically eliminated anyone who threatened his power. He accused potential rivals of treason. He had them executed or exiled. He poisoned Tiberius's son and heir. He seduced and married into the imperial family. His plan was simple. He would become emperor himself, and he almost succeeded. The only reason he failed was that Tiberius, paranoid and suspicious by nature, finally realized what was happening. In 31 AD, Tiberius had Sejanus arrested and executed, but the damage was done. The Praetorian Guard had learned a terrible lesson. They were powerful enough to make or break emperors. All they needed was the will to use that power. They wouldn't have to wait long. Is 37 AD. Emperor Tiberius dies, possibly smothered with a pillow. His successor is his 24-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Caesar, better known as Caligula. You've probably heard stories about Caligula, how he declared himself a god, how he made his horse a senator, how he built a floating bridge across a bay just so he could ride his horse across it. Most of those stories are probably exaggerated. Roman historians hated Caligula and wrote terrible things about him after his death. But here's what we know for certain. Caligula was paranoid, unpredictable, and increasingly unhinged. And most importantly, he didn't trust the Praetorian Guard. He had good reason not to trust them. Caligula had watched Sejanus nearly overthrow Tiberius using the Praetorians. He knew how dangerous they were, so he tried to control them through fear and intimidation. He would randomly accuse Praetorians of treason. He would have them executed on a whim. He publicly mocked and humiliated their officers. This was a catastrophically stupid strategy, because there's something you need to understand about the Praetorian Guard. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the elite. They were proud. They came from good families. Many were educated. They saw themselves as the cream of Roman military society, and they didn't appreciate being treated like disposable servants. By 41 AD, after 4 years of Caligula's reign, multiple plots were brewing to kill the emperor. The Praetorians weren't stupid. They knew that if they killed the emperor, they'd need a replacement ready immediately. Otherwise, there would be chaos, civil war, and they'd probably all be executed. So they made a choice that would define the next 3 centuries. They decided who the next emperor would be. January the 24th, 41 AD. Caligula is leaving the theatre after watching some games. He's walking through a narrow underground passage beneath the palace. His German bodyguards are a few steps behind him. A Praetorian tribune named Cassius Chaerea steps forward. "Is this the password?" he asks. It's a mockery. Caligula had been giving Chaerea humiliating passwords, words like Venus or Priapus, mocking Chaerea's masculinity. Before Caligula can respond, Chaerea draws his sword and strikes him between the neck and shoulder. Caligula goes down. Other conspirators rush forward. They stab him 30 times. Then they find his wife and infant daughter and murder them too. The emperor is dead. Now comes the interesting part. While the assassination is happening, there's a 50-year-old man hiding behind a curtain in the palace. He's terrified. He thinks they're going to kill him next. His name is Claudius. He's Caligula's uncle. He stammers. He drools. He walks with a limp. He's been treated as the family idiot his entire life, kept alive only because everyone assumed he was too incompetent to be a threat. A Praetorian guardsman finds him hiding, and here's where everything changes. The Praetorians don't kill Claudius. Instead, they carry him, literally carry him on their shoulders, back to the Praetorian camp, and they declare him emperor. Let me be clear about what just happened. The Senate didn't choose the new emperor. The Roman people didn't choose him. The army didn't choose him. The Praetorian Guard chose him. They carried Claudius into their fortress and said, "This is the no emperor. Anyone who disagrees can fight 9,000 of us." The Senate, terrified and powerless, had no choice but to confirm their selection. Claudius, grateful to be alive and knowing exactly who put him on the throne, immediately gave every Praetorian a massive bonus, 15,000 sesterces per man, nearly 5 years' salary. This was called a donative. It would become tradition. Every new emperor would have to pay the Praetorians a donative to secure their loyalty. In other words, the Praetorians had just figured out how to monetize regime change. Think about what this means. The Praetorians now had the power to kill emperors and choose their replacements, and every time they did it, they got paid. What could possibly go wrong? Over the next 150 years, the Praetorian Guard would kill emperor after emperor after emperor. Let me run through the highlight reel. Claudius, 54 AD, probably poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who wanted her son Nero on the throne. The Praetorians, who received another massive donative from Nero, didn't seem to mind. Nero, 68 AD. The Praetorians abandoned him when he became too unpopular. Without their support, he was forced to flee Rome. He committed suicide with help from his secretary. Galba, 69 AD, emperor for 7 months, killed by the Praetorians in the Roman Forum because he refused to pay them the donative they expected. They literally hacked him to pieces in broad daylight in the center of Rome. Otho, 69 AD, emperor for 3 months, committed suicide after losing a civil war. Vitellius, 69 AD, emperor for 8 months, captured by his enemies, tortured and killed. His body was thrown in the Tiber River. That's 4 emperors in 1 year. The year of the 4 emperors, all of it happening because the Praetorians had become kingmakers. But things were about to get even worse. 96 AD, Emperor Domitian has been ruling for 15 years. He's paranoid, autocratic, and increasingly tyrannical. He's executed numerous senators. He's declared himself a god. He insists on being called master and god, and he's terrified of being assassinated. He's so afraid that he has the palace walls covered in reflective stone so he can see anyone approaching from behind. He interrogates his servants constantly. He trusts no one. On September 18th, 96 AD, his fears are proven correct. A conspiracy forms. It includes members of his household, palace officials, and, crucially, officers of the Praetorian Guard. They tell Domitian that there's an important message he needs to read. As he's reading the fake message, a former slave stabs him. Domitian fights back. He's a trained soldier. But other conspirators rush in. They stab him multiple times until he's dead. The Praetorians, who were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of assassination, instead helped carry it out. Why? Because Domitian had become unpredictable and dangerous, and the Praetorians had decided that he needed to go. They replaced him with an elderly senator named Nerva, a harmless old man who would do what he was told. But here's where the Praetorians made a crucial mistake. Nerva, surprisingly, had a backbone. When the Praetorians demanded that he execute the people who had killed Domitian's assassins, yes, you read that right, some palace guards had avenged Domitian's death. Nerva refused. The Praetorians besieged the imperial palace and demanded that Nerva hand over the men they wanted killed. Nerva, elderly and sick, bared his throat and said, "Kill me instead." It was a brilliant move. The Praetorians backed down. They couldn't kill another emperor so soon after installing him. It would make them look even worse than they already did. But Nerva learned a lesson. He needed a successor strong enough to control the Praetorians. So he adopted a general named Trajan, a military man who commanded actual legions, real soldiers, not palace guards. And for the next 80 years, Rome had a series of capable emperors, the 5 good emperors, who kept the Praetorians in check, but it couldn't last forever. 180 AD. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, the last of the good emperors, dies. His son Commodus becomes emperor, and Commodus is insane. We talked about him in the other script, but let's focus on his relationship with the Praetorians. Commodus loved the Praetorians. He gave them massive bonuses. He promoted their officers. He spent time in their camp. He treated them like his best friends, and they loved him back. Because Commodus didn't care about governing. He just wanted to play gladiator and throw parties, which meant the Praetorians could do whatever they wanted. They became essentially a gang. They extorted money from wealthy Romans. They sold positions and favors. They terrorized anyone who crossed them. Rome under Commodus was a city ruled by the Praetorian Guard, with the emperor as their willing puppet. This went on for 12 years. Finally, in 192 AD, Commodus's advisors decided enough was enough. They organized a conspiracy to kill him. And surprise, Praetorian officers were involved. Commodus was strangled in his bath by his wrestling partner, a man named Narcissus. The Praetorians had killed another emperor, but this time they'd made a calculation error. There was no obvious successor, no adopted heir, no clear choice. So the Praetorian prefect, a man named Latus, chose an elderly senator named Pertinax. Pertinax seemed like a safe choice, old, respected, harmless. Except Pertinax wasn't harmless. He was a reformer, and he immediately tried to cut the Praetorians' privileges and bonuses. Big mistake. After just 86 days as emperor, a group of Praetorians marched into the palace and murdered Pertinax. They speared him to death in his own throne room, and then they did something that shocked even the Romans, who had seen a lot of shocking things. They auctioned off the throne. March 28th, 193 AD. The Praetorians have just killed Emperor Pertinax, and they have a brilliant, if you're them, idea. They march to the walls of their fortress and announce to the crowd gathered outside, "Who wants to be emperor? Make us an offer." I'm not exaggerating. They literally auctioned off the position of Roman emperor to the highest bidder. Two men enter the bidding. One is Sulpicianus, the father-in-law of the murdered Emperor Pertinax. He's already inside the Praetorian camp when the auction starts. The other is Didius Julianus, an extremely wealthy senator. They can't see each other. Sulpicianus is inside the camp, Julianus is outside, so they're shouting their bids through messengers and over the walls. The bidding starts at 20,000 sesterces per Praetorian. That's about 7 years' salary for a regular soldier. The price climbs higher, 25,000 sesterces per man. Julianus wins with a bid of 25,000 sesterces per Praetorian. That's 225 million sesterces in total, an almost incomprehensible sum. The Praetorians accept his bid. They declare Didius Julianus emperor. Let me put this in perspective. The Roman Empire, which controlled most of the known world, which had existed for nearly 1,000 years, which was the most powerful state in human history, had just been sold at auction like a used chariot. The Senate, humiliated and powerless, had no choice but to confirm Julianus as emperor. But if you think this story ends with Julianus ruling Rome, you haven't been paying attention. Because while this farce was playing out in Rome, the actual Roman legions, the real army, stationed on the frontiers, heard about what happened, and they were furious. The Praetorians were palace guards, pampered, overpaid, living in luxury in Rome. Meanwhile, the legions were on the frontiers, fighting barbarians, defending the empire, doing the actual work of soldiers. And those pampered guards had just sold the empire like it was their personal property. 3 different generals declared themselves emperor and marched on Rome with their legions. Septimius Severus, Pescennius Niger, Clodius Albinus. Severus was closest to Rome. He reached Italy within weeks. Didius Julianus, who had been emperor for exactly 66 days, panicked. He tried to rally the Praetorians to defend Rome. The Praetorians refused. Why would they fight? Julianus had already paid them, and whoever won the civil war would probably pay them again. The Senate, seeing which way the wind was blowing, declared Julianus a public enemy and sentenced him to death. He was executed in the palace, alone, abandoned by everyone. Severus entered Rome without a fight, and then he did something that shocked everyone. He summoned the Praetorian Guard to a meeting outside the city. They came expecting to negotiate their donative from the new emperor. Instead, Severus had them surrounded by his legions. He stripped them of their armor and weapons. He disbanded the entire Praetorian Guard, all of them, fired, exiled from Rome, forbidden from coming within 100 miles of the city. The Praetorians who had ruled Rome for 2 centuries were gone, finally, except Severus made a mistake. He created a new Praetorian Guard, larger, more powerful, recruited from his own legions, and he forgot the lesson of history. Within a generation, the new Praetorians were just as corrupt, just as dangerous, and just as willing to murder emperors as the old ones. The next 100 years were chaos. The crisis of the 3rd century, as historians call it. Over 50 emperors in 50 years, most of them murdered, and the Praetorians were behind most of it. They killed Caracalla in 217 AD. His successor, Macrinus, who had helped plan the assassination, was himself killed by the Praetorians a year later. They killed Elagabalus in 222 AD, him and his mother. They threw both bodies in the Tiber River. They killed Pupienus and Balbinus in 238 AD, both emperors at the same time, dragged them naked through the streets and hacked them to pieces. They killed Gallienus in 268 AD, on and on and on. Every emperor knew the Praetorians might kill them at any moment. Every emperor tried to buy their loyalty with ever larger bonuses, and every emperor failed. The Praetorian Guard had become a cancer at the heart of Rome. They weren't protecting the empire, they were destroying it. But no emperor could get rid of them. Until Constantine. The year is 312 AD. Constantine is fighting a civil war for control of the Western Roman Empire. His opponent is Maxentius, who controls Rome and, crucially, the Praetorian Guard. Constantine's army is outnumbered. Maxentius has the Praetorians, still the elite fighting force they'd always been, plus additional legions. But Constantine has something Maxentius doesn't: soldiers who actually believe in their cause. October 28, 312 AD. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge just outside Rome. The two armies meet. Constantine's forces, supposedly inspired by a vision of the Christian cross, fight with fanatical determination. Maxentius's army breaks. The Praetorians, for all their reputation, are routed. Maxentius himself drowns in the Tiber River trying to flee. Constantine enters Rome as the victor, and he makes a decision that 3 centuries of emperors had been too afraid to make. He abolishes the Praetorian Guard, not temporarily, not symbolically, permanently. He disbands them completely. He tears down the Castra Praetoria, their fortress that had stood for nearly 300 years. He scatters the stones across Rome to be reused in other buildings. The Praetorians are gone, for good this time. But here's the truly interesting part. Constantine replaces them with a new imperial guard, smaller, less powerful, and crucially, not stationed in Rome. Constantine moves the capital of the empire to Constantinople, a new city in the east, far away from Rome, far away from the Senate, far away from the toxic culture that had produced the Praetorians. He understands something that took Rome 300 years to learn. You cannot give soldiers absolute power over the person they're supposed to protect. It will always, always end in disaster. So what's the lesson here? The Praetorian Guard weren't evil. They were normal people given impossible power and perverse incentives. You're a Praetorian, elite, well paid, living in luxury while other soldiers freeze on distant frontiers. Your job is to protect the emperor. But you know emperors can be removed. You've seen it. Maybe even helped. And every time an emperor falls, there's a massive bonus. So when your emperor is unstable or not generous enough, you start thinking, maybe we need a new one. The Praetorian Guard murdered emperors because they could, because it was profitable, and because no one could stop them. For 300 years, the most powerful empire on earth was held hostage by its own bodyguards. When you give armed men the power to make or break the ruler, violence is inevitable. It happened in Rome, the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire, Napoleon's imperial guard, presidential guards in modern dictatorships. Same story, different uniforms. Constantine's solution: don't concentrate that much power in one place. Don't make it profitable to kill who you're supposed to protect. It took Rome 300 years to learn that lesson. The ruins of the Castra Praetoria still exist in Rome today. Tourists walk past them every day, not knowing what they're looking at. The headquarters of the world's longest-running protection racket. A reminder that the most dangerous enemy is sometimes the one standing right behind you, wearing your uniform, carrying your banner, waiting,